Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Soul Igniting Story, where love, passion, and unforgettable moments come alive. Today, we got a heart-melting tale that will sweep you off your feet. Let's dive right in. He watched in horror as a young waitress lifted the heavy tray with her broken hand, trying not to wince. What Benjamin Archer discovered next would change everything he thought he knew about his own business, and the people who made it possible. The ceramic plates clinked against each other as Grace Mercer struggled to balance the oversized dinner tray. Her left hand, wrapped in a thick white bandage, trembled slightly under the weight. Benjamin could see the pain flash across her face for just a split second before she forced that bright smile back into place. The same smile she'd been giving customers all evening. From his corner booth in Maggie's diner, Benjamin felt his stomach twist. How had he never noticed this before? Grace moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but every movement with that injured hand was deliberate, careful. She'd pause for just a moment longer than necessary before picking up plates, angle her body to compensate for her limited grip, and sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she'd flex her fingers and wince. But here's what made Benjamin's heart sink even deeper. Grace wasn't complaining. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't even slowing down. If anything, she was working harder than anyone else in the restaurant, as if she had something to prove. Have you ever wondered what your boss really sees when they watch you work? Do they notice when you're pushing through pain, stress, or personal struggles? Or are you just another cog in the machine, invisible until something goes wrong? Benjamin Archer thought he knew his employees. He thought he was a good boss. He thought running Maggie's diner for nearly 10 years had taught him everything about managing people and building a business. But sitting there, disguised in a simple hoodie and jeans, watching Grace serve tables with a broken hand, he realized he didn't know anything at all. 3 hours earlier, Benjamin had made a decision that felt both desperate and brilliant. His diner was struggling. Revenue down 30% from last year, loyal customers becoming scarce, and tough decisions looming on the horizon. The numbers on his desk told one story, but Benjamin suspected there was another story happening right under his nose, one that no spreadsheet could capture. So he locked his office door, changed out of his usual button-down shirt and slacks, and walked back into his own restaurant as a stranger. Not as the owner, not as the boss, but as just another customer ordering coffee and apple pie on a cold November evening. The plan was simple. Observe his staff in action. See how customers were really being treated. Maybe discover why his once thriving diner was losing its magic. What he didn't expect was to uncover a world of hidden struggles, unspoken sacrifices, and quiet heroism happening right in front of him. Maggie's diner had been Benjamin's life work. He bought the failing restaurant a decade ago with every penny he had, plus a loan that kept him awake at night for the first 3 years. He'd rebuilt it from the ground up, new kitchen equipment, fresh paint, updated menu, the works. The diner had become his pride and joy, a place where locals could grab comfort food and feel like part of community. But lately, that community felt fractured. Customers were fewer. Reviews were lukewarm, and Benjamin found himself wondering if he'd lost touch with what made his diner special in the first place. The financial pressure was mounting. He'd already postponed necessary repairs, delayed equipment upgrades, and cut back on marketing. If things didn't turn around soon, he might have to make cuts that would hurt even more, like reducing staff hours or, worse, letting people go. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, worried about saving his business, while Grace worked through what was obviously significant pain just to keep her job. The contrast made him feel ashamed and inspired all at once. As Benjamin sipped his black coffee and watched Grace navigate the dinner rush, he noticed other things too. The way she checked on elderly customers in extra time, making sure they had everything they needed. How she remembered a regular's usual order before he even sat down. The patient way she handled a difficult customer who complained about his burger being too cold, bringing him a fresh plate without argument or attitude. Grace wasn't just doing her job. She was caring for people, and she was doing it with a broken hand. Probably in constant discomfort, because she couldn't afford not to. But what Benjamin found wasn't just about one broken hand. As the evening wore on, he started seeing other things. Harold, the busboy, looked exhausted in a way that went beyond a long shift. Claire, the cook, seemed distracted, her usual cheerful banter with the waitstaff replaced by quiet focus. Sam, washing dishes in the back, moved with the careful precision of someone carrying invisible weight. Each member of his staff was showing up, doing their jobs, serving customers with smiles and professionalism. But underneath those professional facades, Benjamin was beginning to send a network of private struggles, personal challenges, and quiet resilience that he completely missed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on profit margins and customer satisfaction scores that he'd forgotten to see his employees as whole human beings with complex lives outside these walls. If you've ever felt invisible at work, this story will change how you see everything. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that proves one moment of attention can change lives forever. Because what happened next in that small-town diner didn't just save a struggling business. It revealed the extraordinary power of truly seeing the people around us. Grace was about to finish her shift, her broken hand finally getting a chance to rest. But Benjamin's real education was just beginning. What he learned about her story and the stories of every person working under his roof would transform not just how he ran his business, but how he understood the leadership community and what it really means to care about the people who make success possible. The most shocking discovery wasn't Grace's injury. It was how much courage it took just to show up. Benjamin Archer wasn't supposed to be sitting in a booth at his own restaurant, pretending to be someone he wasn't. But desperation has a way of making even successful people do things they never thought they'd try. At 42, Benjamin had built what most people would consider a dream life. He owned prime real estate in downtown Millbridge, drove a reliable truck that was paid off, and had enough money in his savings account to sleep soundly most nights. Maggie's Diner had been his ticket to financial independence, transforming from a neglected roadside stop into the heart of his small Midwest community. But success, Benjamin was learning, could be fragile. The evening had started like so many others recently, with Benjamin staring at spreadsheets that told an increasingly worrying story. November's numbers were the worst yet. Revenue was down, food costs were up, and the profit margins that had once given him confidence were now keeping him awake until 3 a.m. It wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly a factor. Benjamin had poured his soul into this place. Every booth had been personally selected, every menu item tested and retested until it was perfect. The warm yellow walls, the vintage photographs of Millbridge's founding families, the hand-painted sign outside, all of it represented years of dreams, hard work, and belief in something bigger than himself. The diner had been Benjamin's second chance at life. Before Maggie's, he'd worked for a corporate restaurant chain, climbing the management ladder and collecting paychecks that grew larger but somehow felt emptier with each promotion. He'd been good at his job, great, even, but something fundamental was missing. The work felt hollow, disconnected from anything that mattered. When the opportunity to buy Maggie's came up, Benjamin didn't hesitate. He liquidated his retirement account, took out a business loan that terrified him, and dove headfirst into small business ownership. The first few years were brutal. 16-hour days, sleepless nights, constant worry about making payroll. But gradually, the diner found its rhythm. Customers became regulars, regulars became friends, and friends became part of an extended community that made all the sacrifice worthwhile. Until recently, everything had been working. The diner employed 12 people, served roughly 200 customers on a good day, and had earned a reputation for quality food and friendly service that extended well beyond Millbridge's city limits. Benjamin had even started thinking about expansion, maybe opening a second location in the next town over. But then the economy shifted. A major employer in the area laid off 30% of its workforce. Gas prices made it harder for people to drive into town. For a meal, they could cook at home. Chain restaurants with bigger marketing budgets and lower prices started attracting customers who used to be loyal to local establishments. The changes happened slowly at first, then all at once. Lunch crowds that used to pack the place were now scattered across too many empty tables. Dinner service, once a reliable rush of families and couples, had become hit or miss. Even the breakfast regulars, the farmers and early commuters who used to fill every counter stool, were coming in less frequently. Benjamin had tried everything he could think of. He'd updated the menu, launched a social media presence, offered daily specials and loyalty programs. He'd even hired a consultant who charged him $3,000 to tell him that his brand identity needed refreshing and his customer engagement strategy required optimization. The advice was probably sound, but it felt disconnected from the reality of running a small-town diner where success came down to making people feel welcome and serving food that reminded them of home. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when Benjamin realized he might have to start laying people off. The math was simple and heartbreaking. If revenue didn't improve soon, he couldn't afford to keep his full staff. He'd have to cut hours, reduce positions, or possibly even close on certain days of the week. The thought of letting anyone go made Benjamin physically sick. These weren't just employees. They were people he'd hired personally, trained individually, and watched grow in their roles. Some had been with him for years. Others were newer, but had already become integral parts of what made Maggie special. That's when Benjamin came up with his Undercover plan. He'd read articles about corporate executives who worked anonymously in their own companies to understand operations from the ground level. The idea appealed to him, but not for the usual business reasons. Benjamin didn't need to uncover inefficiencies or catch employees slacking off. His staff worked hard. He knew that much. What he wanted to understand was something more elusive, the actual experience of being a customer at Maggie's Diner. Maybe, Benjamin thought, the problem wasn't his food or his prices or his marketing. Maybe the problem was that he'd become too removed from the daily reality of what happened when people walked through his front door. When was the last time he'd actually sat in one of his own booths, ordered from his own menu, and experienced his restaurant the way his customers did? So on this cold November evening, Benjamin made a decision that felt both ridiculous and necessary. He changed clothes, left his office through the back door, walked around the block, and entered Maggie's Diner as just another customer looking for a warm meal on a cold night. The hostess, Melissa, a part-time college student he'd hired 6 months ago, greeted him with genuine warmth and seated him at a corner booth with a perfect view of the dining room. She handed him a menu he knew by heart and promised that his server would be right with him. From this new perspective, Benjamin could see things he'd never noticed before. The way conversations flowed between tables, creating a gentle hum of community connection. How his staff moved with practiced choreography, anticipating each other's needs and working together seamlessly. The small gestures that made customers smile, an extra refill without being asked, a kind word about someone's choice of dessert, the patient way servers handled elderly customers who needed more time to decide. This was the Maggie's Diner Benjamin had dreamed of creating. Warm, welcoming, genuinely caring. So why was it struggling? The answer, Benjamin suspected, lay not in what he could see, but in what he couldn't. There were stories happening all around him. Stories of the people who worked here, the customers who came here, the community that depended on this place. Stories he'd been too busy managing to actually hear. As Grace approached his table with that bright smile and her carefully hidden injury, Benjamin realized his undercover experiment was about to reveal much more than he'd bargained for. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. The broken hand was just the beginning. What Benjamin discovered about the people who worked for him, who depended on him, who trusted with their livelihoods, would change everything he thought he knew about leadership, responsibility, and what it really meant to run a business that mattered. Before we reveal what Benjamin saw next, let me ask you, have you ever had a boss who truly saw you? Someone who understood that you were more than just the job you performed? Drop a comment and tell us about that moment, because what you're about to learn will show you just how rare and powerful that kind of attention really is. The education Benjamin was about to receive wouldn't come from any business school or consulting firm. It would come from Grace Mercer, a 21-year-old waitress who was about to teach him the most important lesson of his professional life. Grace Mercer appeared at Benjamin's table, like she materialized from the warm kitchen air itself, order pad in her right hand, coffee pot balanced expertly in the crook of her left arm, and that signature smile that had become as much a part of Maggie's atmosphere as the smell of fresh-baked apple pie. Good evening. What can I get started for you tonight? Her voice carried the practiced cheerfulness of someone who'd asked that question hundreds of times, but there was something genuine underneath it, a warmth that couldn't be faked or trained. Benjamin looked up from his menu, seeing Grace clearly for perhaps the first time since he'd hired her 8 months ago. She was younger than most of his staff, probably early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Professional, competent, reliable, all the qualities he valued in an employee. But now, from this different vantage point, Benjamin noticed other things. The way she held her left hand slightly away from her body, how her smile tightened just a fraction when she shifted the coffee pot from one arm to the other, the almost imperceptible pause she took before reaching for his water glass to refill it. "I'll take the apple pie and a cup of black coffee," Benjamin said, studying her face. "And maybe you could recommend something else? What's your favorite thing on the menu?" Grace's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, you have to try the meatloaf. I know that sounds boring, but Claire makes it with this secret blend of spices, and the mashed potatoes are real, not from a box or anything. It's like comfort food that actually comforts you, you know?" As she spoke, Grace gestured with her right hand while keeping her left carefully still. The movement was so subtle, so practiced, that Benjamin realized she'd been compensating like this for a while. This wasn't a fresh injury she was babying. This was someone who had learned to adapt, to work around pain without letting it show. "Sounds perfect," Benjamin said. "The meatloaf it is." Grace scribbled the order with quick, efficient strokes, then headed toward the kitchen. Benjamin watched her navigate between tables, and what he saw made his chest tight with a mixture of admiration and growing concern. At table 4, an elderly gentleman was struggling to read the dessert menu in the dim lighting. Grace noticed immediately, pulling out her phone's flashlight without being asked and holding it steady while he made his choice. When he ordered the chocolate cake, she leaned in conspiratorially and whispered, "I'll make sure Claire gives you the biggest slice. It's your birthday week, isn't it, Mr. Patterson?" The man's face broke into a delighted grin. "How did you remember that?" "Because good customers deserve to feel special," Grace replied, and Benjamin could tell she meant every word. At table 7, a young mother was trying to manage 2 toddlers while her husband was clearly having a stressful phone conversation with someone about work. The children were getting restless, starting to fuss and squirm in their high chairs. Grace appeared at their table with a bowl of crackers and 2 crayons she'd somehow procured from somewhere. "These should keep them busy while you wait for your food," she told the grateful mother. "And don't worry about any mess they make. We got kids here all the time." But it was when Grace returned to the kitchen that Benjamin saw what nearly broke his heart. She thought she was alone, hidden behind the swinging doors that separated the dining room from the kitchen. Benjamin could just glimpse her through the small window in the door, and what he saw, there was a woman in pain trying desperately to hide it. Grace flexed her left hand slowly, wincing at the movement. She rolled her shoulder, trying to work out tension that had clearly been building all evening. For just a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her professional mask slipping to reveal exhaustion and discomfort that went bone deep. Then the kitchen timer went off, and just like that, the mask was back in place. Grace grabbed his order with practiced efficiency and headed back to his table, that bright smile restored as if nothing had happened. "Here we go. 1 meatloaf special and 1 slice of our famous apple pie," she announced, setting the plates down with careful precision. "Can I get you anything else?" "Actually," Benjamin said, making a decision that felt both impulsive and necessary, "would you mind sitting with me for a minute? It's been a long day, and I could use some company." Grace looked surprised, then glanced around the dining room to assess whether she could spare the time. The evening rush was winding down. Most tables were settled with their meals, and her other customers seemed content for the moment. "I suppose I could sit for just a minute," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I'm Grace, by the way. I don't think we've met." "Benjamin," he replied, then made another impulsive decision. "Grace, can I ask you something? Your hand, what happened?" The question clearly caught her off guard. For a split second, her composure wavered, and Benjamin saw something raw and vulnerable flash across her face before she recovered. "Oh, it's nothing serious," she said quickly, instinctively moving her left hand under the table. "Just a little accident. It's getting better every day." But Benjamin had spent enough years managing people to recognize deflection when he heard it. More than that, he'd spent the last hour watching Grace work through obvious discomfort without complaint, and he was beginning to understand that nothing serious probably meant something very serious indeed. "Grace," he said gently, "I don't mean to pry, but I've been watching you work tonight, and I can see that you're in pain. Real pain. And yet you're here, taking care of customers, going above and beyond for everyone who walks through that door. That tells me you're either incredibly dedicated or you're in a situation where you can't afford to take time off to heal properly." Grace stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether the stranger could be trusted with the truth. Benjamin waited, sensing that whatever she was about to tell him would be important. "It's my dominant hand," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I broke it a week ago, and the doctor said I should keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks. But I can't. I need this job. I need the hours. There are people counting on me." "What happened?" Benjamin asked. Grace took a shaky breath. "I volunteer at the community shelter downtown on weekends. Last Saturday, we were moving supplies from a delivery truck into storage, and there was ice on the steps that nobody saw. I slipped carrying a box of canned goods, and when I fell, I put my hand out to break the fall." She demonstrated with her right hand, showing how she'd instinctively tried to catch herself. The box landed right on top of it. I heard the bones crack. Benjamin felt sick. "You broke your hand helping others, and now you're working through the pain because you can't afford not to." "It sounds worse when you say it like that," Grace said with a weak smile. "But what was I supposed to do? Call in sick for 6 weeks? Ask my boss to hold my job while I recovered? That's not how the real world works, especially not for people like me. People like you? People who can't afford to miss paychecks. People who have others depending on them. People who don't have the luxury of taking time off every time something goes wrong." The weight of her words settled over Benjamin like a physical thing. Here was an employee he categorized as reliable and hard-working, never recognizing that her reliability came at such a personal cost. She was literally breaking herself to keep his business running, and he'd been completely oblivious to her sacrifice. "Grace," he began, but she was already standing up. "I should get back to work," she said. "The dinner crowd will be picking up soon, and Claire gets overwhelmed if the orders start backing up." Benjamin watched her walk away, and for the first time in months, the financial problems facing Maggie's diner felt secondary to a much more pressing concern. How many other Grace Mercers were working under his roof? How many other stories of quiet heroism and hidden struggle was he missing because he was too focused on spreadsheets to see the human beings making his success possible? What Grace told him next would shatter everything Benjamin thought he knew about leadership. But first, he had to grapple with a truth that was already rewriting his understanding of what it meant to be a boss, a business owner, and a member of his community. The broken hand wasn't just Grace's problem. It was his problem, too, because somewhere along the way, Benjamin had created a workplace where people felt they had to choose between their health and their livelihood. And that realization was about to change everything. 20 minutes passed before Grace returned to Benjamin's table. And when she did, something had changed in her demeanor. The professional polish remained, but there was a rawness around the edges, as if their conversation had cracked open something she usually kept carefully sealed. "I brought you fresh coffee," she said, though Benjamin noticed she moved more slowly than before, favoring her injured hand even more than earlier. "I've been thinking about what we talked about, and I'm not sure why I told you all that. I don't usually, customers don't need to hear about my problems." "Maybe you told me because you needed to tell someone," Benjamin suggested gently. "And maybe I asked because something about your situation feels important, not just to me, but to a lot of people who might be facing similar challenges." Grace studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether this stranger could be trusted with more of her story. The dining room had settled into the comfortable lull that came after the dinner rush, and her co-workers seemed to have everything well in hand. "What else do you want to know?" she asked, settling into the booth across from him once more. "Tell me about your family," Benjamin said. "Help me understand what people counting on you really means." Grace's hands rested on the table now, the bandaged one alongside the healthy one, and Benjamin could see her make a conscious decision to stop hiding her injury. "I have 2 younger siblings," she began. "Marcus just turned 19 and Lucy 16. Our mom has been raising us alone since I was 14. That's when our dad decided he'd had enough of the responsibility and just left." The way she said it, matter of fact, but with an undertone of old hurt, told Benjamin this abandonment had shaped everything that came after. Mom did her best, but going from 2 incomes to 1, with 3 kids and no help, it was brutal. She worked nights cleaning office buildings and days doing data entry for a temp agency. I watched her fall asleep over bowls of cereal at breakfast, too tired to even chew properly. Grace's voice carried no self-pity, just a steady recounting of facts that had become the foundation of her worldview. By the time I was a senior in high school, I knew college wasn't going to happen the traditional way. My guidance counselor kept showing me brochures for universities I could never afford, talking about student loans like they were some kind of magic solution. But when you're already struggling to keep the lights on, taking on massive debt feels less like opportunity and more like drowning in deeper water. "So you found another way," Benjamin prompted. "Community college, part-time." Grace nodded. "I'm studying business administration with a focus on hospitality management. Eventually, I want to transfer to a 4-year program, maybe get into restaurant operations or hotel management. I know that sounds ambitious for someone who's waiting tables, but I really love this work. Taking care of people, creating experiences that make them feel welcomed and valued. There's something beautiful about that." Benjamin felt a shock of recognition. Grace's career dreams weren't so different from his own path, except she was starting from a place of financial hardship he'd never known. "Your siblings, are they able to pursue their dreams too?" Grace's entire face transformed when she talked about Marcus and Lucy, the professional mask giving way to genuine pride and fierce protectiveness. "Marcus is brilliant," she said, and Benjamin could hear the awe in her voice. "Full academic scholarship to the State University for Computer Science. He builds these incredible programs in his spare time, helps local small businesses set up their websites, tutors other students in advanced mathematics. He's going to do something amazing with his life." "And your sister?" "Lucy wants to be a veterinarian. She's been obsessed with animals since she was little, always bringing home stray cats and injured birds, trying to nurse them back to health. She volunteers at the animal shelter when she can, and her grades are perfect. But—" Grace's expression clouded over, and Benjamin sensed they were approaching the heart of her burden. "But Marcus had to turn down a study abroad program last summer because he needed to work and send money home. And Lucy can't participate in any after-school activities because she has to come straight home to help with Mom." "Help with your mom?" "Mom was diagnosed with lupus about 3 years ago," Grace said quietly. "It's an autoimmune disease that causes inflammation throughout her body. Some days she's completely fine, but other days the joint pain is so severe she can barely get out of bed. The fatigue can be overwhelming, not just tired, but the kind of exhaustion where even thinking clearly becomes difficult." Benjamin had heard of lupus, but had never understood its impact on daily life. That must be incredibly challenging to manage. "The unpredictability is the hardest part," Grace explained. "Mom might feel great on Monday and be completely incapacitated by Wednesday. It makes holding down a regular job almost impossible, which means the financial pressure falls on the rest of us." "When you say financial pressure," Grace began counting on her fingers, a gesture Benjamin realized she probably did often when calculating the family's expenses. "There's rent on our apartment, $800 a month for a 2-bedroom place that's not in the greatest neighborhood, but is what we can afford. Mom's medications cost about $300 monthly, even with insurance. Groceries, utilities, Lucy's school supplies, Marcus's textbooks when his financial aid doesn't cover everything. And then there's my aunt." "Your aunt?" "My mom's sister helped us a lot when Dad first left. She basically kept us from becoming homeless. Now she's going through her own divorce, and she's struggling financially. When I can manage it, I try to help her out too." The scope of Grace's financial responsibilities hit Benjamin like a physical blow. At 21, she was essentially supporting a household of adults while trying to build her own future. "Grace, How do you manage all of that on a waitress's salary? Very, very carefully, she said with a weak smile. I work here 4 nights a week plus weekend lunch shifts. I take my college classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. I study whenever I can find time, usually between midnight and 2 a.m. when everyone else is asleep, or during my breaks here at the diner. And you still find time to volunteer at the community shelter? Grace looked almost embarrassed. I know it sounds crazy when we have our own financial struggles, but working at the shelter reminds me how much we actually have. When you see families who are truly homeless, who don't know where their next meal is coming from, it puts your own problems in perspective. Benjamin thought about his own comfortable life, his paid-off truck, his savings account, his ability to hire consultants when business got challenging. Grace was volunteering to help people who had less than she did, even though she had very little herself. Tell me about the accident, he said. What exactly happened last Saturday? Grace's expression grew distant, as if she was replaying the moment in her mind. The local food bank had just delivered their biggest shipment in months. Enough canned goods, dry goods, and frozen items to feed probably 50 families for a week. All of us volunteers were excited because we'd been running dangerously low. Earlier that week, we'd actually had to turn people away, and that never gets easier. She paused, flexing her injured hand unconsciously. I was helping move boxes from the delivery truck down to the basement storage area. The steps are steep and narrow, and apparently there'd been a water leak somewhere that created this patch of ice at the bottom. None of us had noticed it. Grace demonstrated with her right hand, showing how she'd been balancing the heavy box. I was carrying about 40 pounds of canned vegetables, and my foot hit that ice. I went down hard and instinctively put out my hand to break the fall. The box landed directly on my wrist and hand. You heard it break? I heard the crack, and I knew immediately something was very wrong. But honestly, what I remember most clearly is being upset about the scattered cans. Some of them were dented and rolling all over the basement floor, and all I could think was that we'd have to throw away food that desperate families needed. Benjamin stared at her. You broke your hand, and you were worried about wasted canned goods. I know it sounds ridiculous, Grace said, looking down at the table. But when you've been hungry yourself, when you've had to make a sleeve of crackers last for 2 meals, you don't waste food, even when you're in terrible pain. The casual mention hit Benjamin like a punch to the gut. You've been hungry? Your family has been food insecure. Grace nodded without meeting his eyes. The first 8 months after Dad left were really rough. Mom was scrambling to find work. We didn't know about food assistance programs, and there were definitely weeks when dinner was peanut butter sandwiches, or we'd make one kind of soup stretch across 3 days. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if childhood hunger was just another obstacle she'd overcome rather than a traumatic experience that should never happen to any family. So when you volunteer at the shelter, I'm helping people avoid what my family went through. I understand the desperation, the shame, the way hunger makes it hard to think about anything else. Benjamin felt overwhelmed by the layers of Grace's story. Here was someone who had lived through genuine hardship and was using that experience to help others, all while carrying enormous financial responsibility for her family's survival. What happened after you got hurt at the shelter? The other volunteers drove me to urgent care. The x-rays showed fractures in 2 of the small bones in my hand, plus a hairline crack in my wrist. The doctor was very clear. 6 to 8 weeks of complete immobilization, no lifting, no repetitive gripping motions. And you told him what? Grace's voice became very quiet. I told him I understood his recommendations, but that I had to work. He gave me this whole speech about permanent damage, about losing range of motion, about how bones need proper time to heal. He looked at me like I was being deliberately reckless. But you came to work anyway. I took Sunday off, Grace said defensively, and I've been incredibly careful about how I use my hand. I've developed techniques for carrying plates, for gripping glasses, for doing my job without putting too much stress on the healing bones. It hurts, but I can manage the pain. Grace, Benjamin said gently, what aren't you telling me about this decision? She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, Benjamin had to strain to hear her. The urgent care visit cost me $300, even with my student health insurance. The x-rays were another $200. The prescription pain medication they wanted to give me would have been $60 that I didn't have. So I've been managing with over-the-counter medicine from the dollar store. The financial breakdown was devastating in its simplicity. But the real problem is the lost wages. 6 weeks off work would mean losing about $4,000 in income. Plus, I'd probably lose my job entirely. Restaurants can't hold positions open for part-time employees who can't work. What about workers' compensation? Some kind of disability insurance. Grace gave him a look that was both patient and infinitely sad. This didn't happen at work, so there's no workers' compensation. And I'm 21, working part-time at a diner. I don't have disability insurance. Most people in jobs like mine don't have any safety net at all. The phrase hit Benjamin hard. People in jobs like mine. As if Grace had already accepted that she belonged to a category of workers who didn't deserve basic protections, who were expected to absorb all the risks of living without any support system. Grace, what would happen to your family if you couldn't work? If your hand got worse, or if you had to quit? I can't think about that, she said quickly, and Benjamin could see fear flash across her face. If I can't work, Marcus drops out of school and gets a full-time job. Lucy quits school to work and help take care of Mom. We lose our apartment. Mom's medical care becomes even more complicated and expensive. So you work through the pain because the alternative is watching my family's future disappear. Marcus's scholarship, Lucy's veterinary dreams, Mom's health care, our housing stability. All of it depends on me being able to show up here every day and do my job. So yes, I work through the pain because pain is temporary, but destroying my family's future will be permanent. Benjamin sat in stunned silence, processing the impossible weight Grace carried. This wasn't just about individual resilience or work ethic. This was about systematic failures that forced young people to sacrifice their health for their family's survival. If Grace's story hits close to home, you're not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their struggles are seen and valued, because what Benjamin discovers next will show you how one person's awareness can change everything. Grace was gathering herself to return to work, her brief break nearly over. But Benjamin's real education was just beginning. What he was about to learn would shatter every assumption he'd made about the people who made his business possible. Grace excused herself to check on her other tables, leaving Benjamin alone with his thoughts and a growing sense of unease that had nothing to do with his diner's financial troubles. As he watched her move through the dining room, still careful with her injured hand, still smiling at every customer, he began to notice things he'd never seen before. Or rather, things he'd never allowed himself to see. At the counter, Harold Martinez was bussing tables with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown for the past 2 years. Benjamin had always considered Harold reliable, punctual, never any complaints. But now, studying him with different eyes, Benjamin noticed exhaustion that went deeper than a long shift. The way Harold's shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching. How he'd pause sometimes, staring at nothing, as if carrying thoughts too heavy for his 23-year-old frame. Benjamin found himself really looking at Harold for the first time since he'd hired him. Tall, lean, with calloused hands that spoke of work beyond his diner duties. Always polite with customers, helpful with newer employees, but never one to join the casual conversations that happened during slow periods. Harold kept to himself, did his job, and left quietly at the end of each shift. What was Harold's story? What struggles was he carrying while he cleared tables and wiped down surfaces, making Benjamin's restaurant run smoothly? Behind the kitchen's pass-through window, Claire Thompson was plating the evening's last few orders with her usual attention to detail. Claire had been with Maggie's for nearly 4 years, working her way up from prep cook to the evening shift supervisor. She had a reputation for keeping the kitchen calm during rushes, for training new employees with patience, and for creating the kind of comfort food that kept customers coming back. But tonight, Benjamin noticed Claire's forced cheerfulness when she interacted with the wait staff. The way she'd pause between orders, staring down at her hands with an expression of profound sadness before snapping back into professional mode. She was 41 years old, Benjamin knew from her employment file, but lately she looked older, worn down by something beyond the physical demands of kitchen work. What was happening in Claire's life that he'd been too busy or too disconnected to notice? Near the dish station, Sam Rodriguez worked with methodical precision, his movements economical and focused. Sam was newer to the team, hired just 6 months ago after the previous dishwasher had moved away. He was quiet, always early for his shifts, never missed work. But Benjamin realized he knew almost nothing about Sam beyond his work performance. Sam was probably in his mid-30s. Though he sometimes looked much older, he had the careful posture of someone who'd learned to make himself invisible, to do his job without drawing attention. When other employees joked around during breaks, Sam would smile politely but rarely participate. He ate his dinner alone, usually standing by the back door during his break, looking out at the parking lot with an expression Benjamin couldn't read. What circumstances had brought Sam to this job? What was behind that careful distance he maintained from everyone around him? The realization hit Benjamin like cold water. He employed 12 people, saw them nearly every day, depended on them completely, and he knew almost nothing about their actual lives. He could tell you Harold's schedule preferences and Claire's favorite recipes and Sam's efficiency ratings, but he couldn't tell you what kept any of them awake at night. For the first time in his 10 years of business ownership, Benjamin understood that he'd been managing positions rather than leading people. He'd hired bodies to fill roles, evaluated performance metrics, and calculated labor costs. But the human beings who made his success possible had remained essentially invisible to him. Grace's broken hand wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symbol of how disconnected he'd become from the real lives of the people who trusted him with their livelihoods. As the evening wound down and the last customers settled their bills, Benjamin made a decision that felt both uncomfortable and necessary. Instead of retreating to his office to review the day's receipts, he was going to stay. He was going to observe the closing routine, the conversations that happened when the public was gone, the moments when his employees thought they were unobserved. What he discovered over the next hour would change everything he thought he knew about leadership. Harold was the first to reveal his burden. Though he didn't mean to, Benjamin watched him count his tips at the end of the shift, mostly quarters and dollar bills, the modest rewards of serving coffee and clearing tables in a small-town diner. Harold counted twice, arranged the bills and coins into careful piles, then pulled out his phone to use the calculator. $47.30, Harold said to himself. So, quietly, Benjamin almost missed it. That's $400 this week, if tomorrow's the same. Benjamin saw Harold open a notes app on his phone and type, Week 3, for $100. Total, $1,847. Need $3,200. Harold was saving for something specific, something that required exactly $3,200, and he was tracking every dollar with the precision of someone for whom money was never casual or abundant. Claire's story emerged when she thought everyone had left the kitchen. Benjamin heard her on the phone with someone, her voice strained and tired. I know the payment is late, Claire was saying. I understand there are fees, but I get paid on Friday, and I can send you $300 then. No, I can't do $400. $300 is already half my paycheck, and I have other bills. There was a long pause, and when Claire spoke again, her voice was thick with unshed tears. Please don't cancel the policy. I know I'm behind, but I can't lose the coverage. Not with everything that's happening. Just give me until Friday, please. Insurance payments. Medical coverage that Claire couldn't afford, but couldn't live without. Another employee making impossible financial calculations while trying to keep her life from falling apart. Sam's revelation came last and was the most heartbreaking. As he finished cleaning the dish area, Benjamin heard him talking quietly to himself. Not unusual for someone working alone, but the content of Sam's monologue stopped Benjamin cold. Day 37, Sam was saying as he scrubbed the last pot. Rent's paid through next week. Groceries will last 4 more days if I'm careful. Meeting tomorrow night at 7. Can't miss another one or they'll drop me from the program. Sam was counting days, rationing food, attending some kind of program that required perfect attendance. The careful way he moved, the deliberate distance he kept from others, the quiet intensity he brought to even the most mundane tasks. Suddenly it all made sense. Sam was in recovery. From addiction. from whatever circumstances had brought him to rock bottom. And now, he was rebuilding his life one dish, one shift, one day at a time. The job at Maggie's wasn't just employment for Sam. It was a lifeline, a crucial part of staying sober and staying alive. Benjamin stood in the shadows of his own restaurant, overwhelmed by what he'd discovered. Harold was saving money for something desperately important. Claire was struggling to afford basic insurance while dealing with some kind of crisis. Sam was fighting for his sobriety while living on the edge of financial disaster. And Grace was working with a broken hand because she couldn't afford not to. Each of his employees was showing up every day, doing excellent work, serving customers with professionalism and care, all while carrying burdens that would have crushed many people. They were heroes in the most ordinary sense. People doing extraordinary things not for glory or recognition, but because they had no other choice. But knowing the truth was only the beginning. What Benjamin did next would either save his diner and transform the lives of his employees, or destroy everything he'd built through a decade of hard work. The question that would determine everything was simple. What kind of leader was he going to choose to be? The answer would require Benjamin to risk not just his business model, but his entire understanding of what success really meant. Benjamin didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by financial projections, employee files, and a yellow legal pad covered with calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with human dignity. By 6 a.m., he made a decision that would either save Maggie's diner or destroy completely. At 8 o'clock sharp, Benjamin called an emergency staff meeting. The timing was unusual. Most of his employees didn't start their shifts until later, but he'd offered to pay everyone for their time, and the promise of unexpected income had ensured full attendance. The dining room felt different with all 12 employees gathered around the largest table, coffee mug in hand, expressions ranging from curious to worried. Emergency meetings in the restaurant business usually meant bad news, layoffs, hour cuts, or closure announcements. Grace sat near the end of the table, her bandaged hand resting carefully in her lap. Harold looked exhausted, probably having worked a late shift at whatever second job he was juggling. Claire appeared nervous, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. Sam sat quietly in the corner, watching Benjamin with the alert stillness of someone accustomed to expecting the worst. "I know you're probably wondering why I called everyone in this morning," Benjamin began, then paused, looking around the table at faces he'd seen nearly every day for months or years without truly seeing it all. "Before I tell you what I've decided, I need to apologize. I need to apologize for being the kind of boss who knew your work schedules but not your life circumstances, who could tell you the recipe for our apple pie but couldn't tell you what challenges you were facing outside these walls." The employees exchanged glances, confusion evident on their faces. This wasn't how emergency meetings usually started. "Last night, I did something I should have done a long time ago," Benjamin continued. "I spent time in this restaurant not as the owner, but as a customer. And what I saw changed everything I thought I knew about this business and about leadership." He looked directly at Grace. "I saw employees working through pain because they couldn't afford not to. I saw people carrying financial burdens that would crush most individuals, yet showing up every day with professionalism and dedication that puts me to shame." Grace's face flushed, and Benjamin could see her trying to process whether she was in trouble or being praised. "I discovered that while I've been worried about profit margins and customer satisfaction scores, the people who make this restaurant possible have been quietly performing acts of heroism just by coming to work each day." Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Claire looked down at her hands. "So here's what we're going to do differently. Starting today," Benjamin announced, pulling out the legal pad where he'd spent the night calculating not costs, but investments in human dignity. "First, we're instituting a comprehensive emergency hardship fund. Any employee facing a medical crisis, family emergency, or unexpected financial burden can access up to $5,000 interest-free, with repayment schedules based on your individual circumstances, not arbitrary deadlines." The silence around the table was profound. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Second, we're implementing flexible emergency leave policies. If you're injured, sick, or deal with a family crisis, you can take the time you need to heal properly without losing your job or your health insurance. Your position will be held, and we'll work together to ensure your financial stability during recovery. Sam looked up sharply, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Third, we're partnering with local healthcare providers to offer on-site counseling services and mental health support. Life is hard, and everyone deserves access to professional guidance when they're struggling. These services will be completely confidential and available to all employees and their immediate family members. Benjamin could see the shock registering on faces around the table, but he wasn't finished. Fourth, we're establishing educational support programs. If you're working toward a degree, professional certification, or skills training that will advance your career, Maggie's Diner will help cover tuition costs and provide flexible scheduling to accommodate your studies. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Fifth, we're creating a profit-sharing program. When this restaurant does well, everyone who contributes to that success should benefit. Starting next quarter, 10% of our net profits will be distributed among staff based on hours worked and length of employment. Benjamin, Claire said quietly, her voice shaking, the restaurant can't afford all of this. You're already struggling financially. Claire, that's exactly wrong, Benjamin replied firmly. The restaurant can't afford not to do this. I've been so focused on cutting costs that I forgot the most basic truth of business. Your employees are your most valuable asset. Not because of what they produce, but because of who they are as human beings. He stood up, pacing slightly as the passion he'd felt all night began to emerge. Do you know what I learned about each of you last night? Harold, you're saving every dollar for something that costs exactly $3,200. You've been tracking your progress for weeks, working extra hours, counting tips down to the penny. What are you saving for? Harold looked stunned that Benjamin had noticed. My sister needs surgery, he said quietly. She doesn't have insurance, and the down payment for the procedure is $3,200. Without it, she'll lose her hearing permanently. The table erupted in surprised murmurs. Harold had been carrying this burden alone for months. Claire, Benjamin continued, you're behind on insurance payments because you're dealing with some kind of crisis that requires medical coverage you can barely afford. What's happening? Claire's eyes filled with tears. My ex-husband died unexpectedly 6 months ago. He had custody of our 2 kids, and suddenly I'm a single mom again with no child support and doubled expenses. The life insurance policy is all that's keeping us afloat, but the premiums are killing me. More gas around the table. Claire had been raising 2 children alone while working full-time, and no one had known. And Sam, Benjamin said gently, you're in recovery, aren't you? Counting days, attending meetings, rebuilding your life one shift at a time. Sam nodded slowly, his carefully maintained privacy suddenly exposed but somehow not violated. 43 days sober, he said quietly. This job, it's the first stable thing I've had in 3 years. I was terrified you'd find out about my history and let me go. Sam, you've been one of our most reliable employees since day one. Your past doesn't define your value to this team. Benjamin looked around the table at his employees, his people, and felt a clarity he'd never experienced as a business owner. Here's what I realized last night. I've been running this restaurant like a machine, focused on efficiency and profit margins. But this isn't a machine, it's a community. And communities take care of each other. But the money, Melissa, the hostess, said hesitantly. These programs will cost thousands of dollars. What if the restaurant can't sustain it? Benjamin smiled for the first time that morning. Melissa, let me ask you something. How do you think our customers will respond when they're served by employees who feel valued, supported, and genuinely cared for? How do you think our service will improve when people aren't working through pain or distracted by financial terror? He pulled out his phone and showed them the calculations he'd been working on since 3 a.m. I ran the numbers. If these programs help reduce our turnover by just 20%, we'll save more money on recruitment and training costs than we'll spend on support services. If employee satisfaction increases our customer satisfaction scores by 15%, we'll see increased repeat business that more than pays for profit sharing. But more importantly, Benjamin continued, if we create a workplace where people can bring their whole selves to work, where they don't have to hide injuries or worry about losing their jobs during family crises, We'll become the kind of restaurant that attracts the best employees and the most loyal customers. Grace finally found her voice. Benjamin, what you're offering, it would change everything for me, for my family. I could actually take time to let my hand heal properly. I could focus on my studies without worrying about making rent. That's exactly the point, Grace. Your success is our success. Your family's stability contributes to our restaurant's stability. Your education and career growth make our entire team stronger. Harold was staring at his hands, clearly emotional. If you could really help with my sister's surgery. She's only 16, Benjamin. She shouldn't have to live with hearing loss because we can't afford medical care. Harold, as of today, your sister's surgery is covered. No repayment schedule, no interest, no questions asked. That's what the emergency fund is for. The room fell silent except for the sound of Claire crying quietly. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you do this? Why would you risk your business for employees? Benjamin sat back down, looking at each face around the table. Because I finally realized that you're not my employees. You're my partners. You're the people who make everything I've built possible. And partners take care of each other. He paused, thinking about how to explain the transformation he'd experienced in a single night. I spent 10 years building a successful restaurant, but I forgot to build a successful community. I focus on profit margins instead of the people who generate those profits. I measure success by revenue instead of by the lives we were impacting. What Benjamin is offering here, Sam said slowly, it's not just about money or benefits. It's about dignity. It's about being seen as a whole person instead of just a function. Exactly, Benjamin nodded. And here's the thing. I believe this approach won't just make us better people. I believe it will make us a better business. When people feel valued and supported, they do extraordinary work. When employees know their boss cares about their success, they care more deeply about the company's success. The meeting continued for another hour, with Benjamin outlining the specific details of each program, answering questions, and listening to suggestions from his staff. By the time they finished, something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of Maggie's Diner. What Benjamin had started as a desperate attempt to save his struggling restaurant had become something much more powerful, a transformation of what it meant to be a leader, an employer, and a member of a community. The question now was whether his bold gamble would pay off, or whether his compassion would destroy everything he'd worked to build. 3 months after Benjamin's revolutionary staff meeting, Maggie's Diner looked exactly the same from the outside. The same hand-painted sign, the same yellow walls, the same vintage photographs of mill bridges, founding families. But inside, everything had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Grace Mercer stood behind the counter, her left hand completely healed, flexing her fingers with obvious relief as she counted the morning's receipts. The cast was gone, the bandages were gone, and for the first time in months, she moved without the careful, compensating postures that had become second nature during her injury. How does it feel? Benjamin asked, approaching the counter with 2 cups of coffee. Grace held up her hand, wiggling her fingers with a smile that reached her eyes. Like I have my life back, she said simply. I didn't realize how much energy it took to constantly work around the pain until the pain was gone. The change in Grace went far deeper than her physical healing. She'd been able to take 3 full weeks off work immediately after Benjamin's announcement, allowing her bones to heal properly without the constant stress of lifting, gripping, and carrying. The hardship fund had covered her lost wages, and the new healthcare benefits had paid for follow-up x-rays and physical therapy that her student insurance never would have covered. My doctor was amazed, Grace continued, organizing the morning's receipts with practiced efficiency. He said bones that heal properly from the beginning are actually stronger than they were before the break. But bones that heal while being constantly re-injured can cause problems for years. Benjamin thought about the metaphor in that medical fact. Grace's hand wasn't just healed, it was stronger than before. And the same seemed to be true of her entire life. How are your classes going? He asked. Grace's face lit up with excitement. That's the best part. Since I don't have to work as many hours to make ends meet, I was able to add 2 more courses this semester. I'm actually on track to finish my associate degree 6 months early, and I've already been accepted into the hospitality management program at the state university. The educational support program had transformed Grace's academic trajectory. With tuition assistance and flexible scheduling, she'd gone from struggling to keep up with part-time classes to excelling in a full course load that would prepare her for management roles in the restaurant industry. "My advisor says I'm a completely different student now," Grace explained. "When you're not constantly exhausted and stressed about money, it's amazing how much mental energy you have for actually learning." But the most profound change in Grace's life had nothing to do with her hand or her education. It was about her family. "Marcus got accepted into the study abroad program," she announced, unable to contain her excitement. "The one he had to turn down last year. With the financial pressure off me, he could actually accept it this time. He's going to Germany next semester to work with some of the best computer science programs in the world." Benjamin felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. Grace's brother's dreams were becoming reality because Grace no longer had to carry the entire family's financial burden alone. And Lucy joined the debate team and the pre-veterinary club at school. She's been accepted into a summer internship program at the animal hospital downtown. For the first time since Dad left, she gets to focus on her future instead of just survival. The changes in Grace's family situation had created a positive cycle. With less financial stress, Grace's mother had been able to focus more energy on managing her lupus symptoms. Better symptom management meant more good days, which meant she could work part-time again, which reduced the pressure on Grace even further. "Mom started working at the community center 3 days a week," Grace explained. "It's perfect for her because they understand about chronic illness and let her adjust her schedule around flare-ups. She's happier than she's been in years because she feels productive again instead of just being someone people have to take care of." But Grace's story was just one of many transformations happening at Maggie's Diner. Harold Martinez had taken a leave of absence the week after Benjamin's announcement, using the emergency fund to pay for his sister's hearing surgery. The procedure was successful, and Harold had returned to work with a lightness in his demeanor that everyone noticed. "You should see her," Harold had told Grace during a recent shift. "She can hear everything now. Music, conversations, even the sound of rain. She cried for an hour the first time she heard birds singing in the morning." Harold was still saving money, but now it was for his sister's college fund instead of emergency medical care. The difference between saving for opportunity versus saving for survival had transformed his entire approach to work and life. Claire Thompson had used a flexible leave policy to spend a month helping her children adjust to their new living situation. With the emergency fund covering her immediate expenses, she'd been able to focus on creating stability for her family instead of constantly worrying about making ends meet. "The kids are doing so much better," Claire confided to Grace. "When you're not stressed all the time, when you can actually be present instead of constantly worrying about money, parenting becomes completely different." Claire had also started taking advantage of the counseling services, working through the grief of her ex-husband's death and the challenges of sudden single parenthood. The mental health support had given her tools for managing stress and trauma that she'd been carrying alone for months. Sam Rodriguez's transformation had been perhaps the most remarkable. With job security guaranteed and mental health support available, he'd been able to focus entirely on his recovery instead of constantly fearing that his past would cost him his livelihood. "I'm at 97 days now," Sam had told Benjamin recently. "For the first time in 3 years, I can think about the future instead of just surviving each day." Sam had started attending community college classes in the evenings, using the educational support program to pursue certification in restaurant management. His quiet leadership skills and attention to detail were becoming more apparent as his confidence grew. The changes in individual employees had created changes in the entire restaurant culture. With people feeling secure and supported, they were more collaborative, more creative, and more invested in the success of the business. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 23%. Employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero. Word of mouth about both the food and the workplace culture had attracted new customers and new job applicants. "You know what's funny?" Grace said, refilling Benjamin's coffee cup. "When you first announced all these programs, I was worried they would make us feel like charity cases, like we were being pitted instead of valued. And now I understand that this is what respect actually looks like. It's not just saying you value your employees. It's creating systems that prove you value them. It's recognizing that we're not just here to serve food. We're here to build something together. Grace paused, looking around a dining room where her co-workers were preparing for the lunch rush with obvious pride and engagement. I feel like a partner now instead of just a worker. And when people feel like partners, they don't just do their jobs. They pour their hearts into making the whole thing successful. But the real shock wasn't what Benjamin gave his employees. It was what they gave him in return. A level of dedication, innovation, and care that transformed Maggie's Diner from a struggling restaurant into a thriving community institution. The healing that began with Grace's broken hand had spread throughout the entire organization, creating something stronger and more resilient than any of them had imagined possible. 6 months after Benjamin's transformation began, Maggie's Diner had become something unprecedented in Millbridge, a business that was thriving not despite caring for its employees, but because of it. The story of Grace's broken hand had spread throughout the small town, then beyond, attracting attention from business owners, community leaders, and working families who recognized themselves in the struggles and triumphs happening at the little restaurant on Main Street. But the real power of Benjamin's experiment wasn't in the specific programs he'd created. It was in the fundamental shift in thinking that made those programs possible, a shift that any leader in any industry could apply to transform their own workplace and community. The first lesson was perhaps the most revolutionary, seeing employees as whole human beings rather than just functions in a business operation. I used to think good management meant keeping personal and professional life separate, Benjamin reflected during a recent interview with the local newspaper. I thought I was being respectful by not prying into people's private affairs. But what I learned is that you can't separate someone's work performance from their life circumstances. When Grace was in pain, it affected everything: her energy, her focus, her ability to provide the level of service our customers deserved. This insight had implications far beyond the restaurant industry. In offices, factories, retail stores, and healthcare facilities across the country, millions of workers were struggling with hidden burdens, medical bills, family crises, housing insecurity, educational debt, while trying to maintain professional facades that required enormous emotional energy. When we pretend work exists in a vacuum, separate from real life, we're essentially asking people to leave part of themselves at home, Benjamin explained. But that's impossible. The whole person shows up to work every day, whether we acknowledge it or not. The second lesson challenged everything most businesses believed about the relationship between costs and profits. Traditional business thinking suggested that employee benefits were expenses that reduced profitability. Benjamin's experience proved the opposite. Investing in employee well-being was one of the most effective strategies for improving business performance. Our labor costs actually went down after we instituted these programs, Benjamin noted, reviewing the financial data from the past 6 months. When people feel secure and supported, they're more productive, more creative, and more committed to quality. We've had zero turnover, which means no recruitment costs, no training expenses, no productivity loss from constantly breaking in new staff. The customer experience had improved dramatically as well. When employees felt valued and supported, they brought genuine enthusiasm to their interactions with patrons. Word of mouth about both the food and the atmosphere had generated more new customers than any advertising campaign could have achieved. People can sense authenticity, Grace observed. When your staff genuinely loves coming to work, when they feel proud of where they work, customers pick up on that energy immediately. The third lesson was about the multiplicative power of community-minded business practices. Benjamin's model hadn't just transformed Maggie's Diner. It had inspired changes throughout Millbridge. Other local businesses had begun implementing their own employee support programs. The community shelter where Grace had been injured started a partnership with local employers to provide workplace safety training. The hospital began offering sliding scale payment plans for working families who didn't qualify for traditional assistance programs. When one business starts treating people with dignity, it raises the standard for everyone, explained Dr. Martinez, who had treated Grace's injury and had since become an advocate for workplace wellness programs. Employees start expecting better treatment. Customers start supporting businesses that align with their values, and communities become stronger overall. The fourth lesson addressed one of the most persistent myths in American business culture: That caring for employees meant sacrificing competitiveness. Maggie's Diner was now the most successful restaurant in a 3-town radius, not because it had cut costs or maximized efficiency, but because it had maximized human potential. The investment in employee well-being had generated returns that traditional business metrics couldn't capture. Innovation, loyalty, reputation, and community support. We're not just competing on price or convenience anymore, Benjamin realized. We're competing on values, on the kind of workplace we've created, on the kind of community impact we're having. And that's a much more sustainable competitive advantage. The fifth and perhaps most important lesson was about the hidden heroism that exists in every workplace. Grace's story had revealed something profound. Extraordinary courage and resilience were happening all around us every day, in the most ordinary circumstances. People were working through pain, supporting families, pursuing education, overcoming addiction, and rebuilding their lives while maintaining professional competence and kindness toward others. Every workplace is full of heroes, Benjamin had come to understand. People who show up every day and do excellent work while carrying burdens that would break most people. The question is whether we're creating environments that recognize and support the heroism, or whether we're ignoring it and hoping it continues indefinitely. This realization had applications far beyond business management. In schools, healthcare systems, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations, leaders were beginning to recognize that their most valuable asset wasn't their technology or their processes. It was the resilience and dedication of the people who made their missions possible. For viewers watching Grace's story, the lessons are both inspiring and actionable. What's one small way you can make someone feel seen today? Challenge yourself and let us know in the comments, because the power to transform lives through recognition and support isn't limited to business owners. It's available to every person who chooses to notice the struggles and strengths of the people around them. Teachers could recognize students who are working jobs to support their families. Healthcare workers could acknowledge colleagues who are managing their own health challenges while caring for others. Neighbors could support local businesses that demonstrated genuine care for their employees. The broken hand that had started Benjamin's journey of discovery had become a symbol of something much larger. The fractures in our economic system that force people to choose between their health and their survival, and the healing power of communities that refuse to accept those false choices. Grace's story proved that transformation was possible, not through grand gestures or massive policy changes, but through the accumulated power of individuals deciding to see, value, and support the people around them. 1 year after Benjamin Archer first noticed Grace Mercer's broken hand, Maggie's Diner hosted its first annual employee appreciation celebration. The event wasn't just a company party. It had become a community gathering that brought together employees, their families, regular customers, and local business owners who had been inspired by Benjamin's transformation. Grace stood at the microphone that evening, no longer the struggling waitress with a hidden injury, but confident young woman who had just been accepted into a prestigious hospitality management program with a full scholarship. Her left hand, now completely healed and stronger than ever, held notes for a speech she prepared about the power of being truly seen. A year ago, I was working with broken hand because I thought I had no choice, Grace began, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded dining room. I thought asking for help was weakness. I thought pushing through pain was strength. I thought being invisible was safer than being vulnerable. The room was completely silent. Everyone focused on Grace's words. But Benjamin taught me something that changed my entire life. Being seen isn't about being pitted. It's about being valued. And when people feel valued, they don't just survive, they thrive. Benjamin watched from the corner, thinking about how far they'd all come. Harold's sister was now in college, her hearing fully restored. Claire had started her own catering business as a side venture, using skills she developed in Maggie's kitchen. Sam was 6 months away from completing his restaurant management certification and had been offered promotion to assistant manager. But the real transformation went deeper than individual success stories. Maggie's Diner had become a model for businesses throughout the region, proving that profitability and compassion weren't opposing forces. They were complementary strategies that created stronger companies and healthier communities. The broken hand was just the beginning, Grace continued. What we discovered was that when you fix the systems that force people to work through pain, you don't just heal individuals. You heal entire communities. As Grace wrapped up her speech, Benjamin realized that their story had become something much larger than he'd ever imagined. It had become proof that ordinary people in ordinary places could create extraordinary change simply by choosing to notice, care, and act. The evening concluded with customers and community members signing up to volunteer with local organizations, other business owners committing to implement their own employee support programs, and dozens of people sharing their own stories of hidden struggles and quiet heroism. 1 year later, Benjamin and Grace still work side by side at Maggie's Diner, but their relationship had evolved from employer and employee to mentor and protege, from boss and worker to partners in creating something meaningful. You know what I learned from all of this? Benjamin reflected as they cleaned up after the celebration. The most powerful thing you can do as a leader isn't to have all the answers. It's to ask the right questions and then really listen to the responses. What's the right question? Grace asked. It's simple, Benjamin smiled. How are you? Really, how are you? And then caring enough to hear the real answer. The next time you see someone struggling, remember Grace's broken hand. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply notice. And in that moment of attention, in that choice to see someone fully, lies the potential to transform not just their life, but your own and your entire community. If this story moved you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more soul-igniting stories that remind us of our shared humanity, because in a world that often feels divided, stories like Grace's prove that compassion and success can go hand in hand. What's your Grace story? Share it in the comment below, because every act of recognition, every moment of caring, every choice to see someone fully has the power to change the world, one broken hand at a time. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this extraordinary story here on Soul Igniting Story. I truly appreciate you for taking the time to be with us, to open your heart, and to let these words spark something within your soul. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, to uplift, and to remind us all that love, hope, and resilience are alive in every corner of the world. If this story touched you, made you smile, or even brought a little spark of wonder to your day, I would be so grateful if you could show your support. Please give this video a like. It helps more souls discover these stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or even your own experiences connected to the story. Your words make this community come alive. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next beautiful journey we'll be sharing together. Until next time, thank you again for being part of the Soul Igniting Story family, where every story lights a flame within.